Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market and Deli. Welcome to a wonderful hybrid class with local functional medicine practitioner and family nurse practitioner, Michelle Sandwisch. She owns Origin Medicine and has a wonderful class in store for all of you. The Autoimmune Puzzle, a functional medicine blueprint for wellness. Definitely check out her website, and there is a plethora of information to behold tonight. So let's give a round of applause for Michelle.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and for the warm welcome, and I really appreciate Marlene's Market having me tonight. And again, thanks for all of you that are online and all of you that have joined me tonight. My hope is to really empower you with some knowledge and inspire you to take a proactive approach in your health. And knowledge is power. And ultimately, I want to help you to improve your quality of life and really regain control over your health, or maintain control over your health as you progress through life. So, hi everyone, thanks for coming. Okay. So tonight, obviously, we're talking about Autoimmune 101. And I guess I didn't say, I do want to just mention that autoimmunity is really personal to me because I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2013. There we go. Now my microphone's really working. Was diagnosed in 2013, and at the time I was living in Ohio. I had every symptom you could think of except really digestive issues. So I didn't really understand what was going on. I had a lot of fatigue and joint pain and crazy rashes, and just couldn't figure out what was going on. I was going to a really great primary care provider who tried to help me, but she swore up and down I had it on. Later, after I was finally diagnosed, she said, I really thought you had an autoimmune disease, but I could never prove it, basically. And so we were just essentially managing symptoms the best that we could. Eventually, I got that diagnosis. And then at that time, I was not a nurse practitioner yet. I was a registered nurse and a health coach. I was living in Ohio, and the Center for Functional Medicine was about 2 hours away. It had just opened up. Mark Hyman was if you guys know who Mark Hyman is, he's one of the big functional medicine gurus. He was the medical director and started, and I was one of their first 100 patients. And I just fell in love with the approach. It was very different from anything that I had experienced, and I decided to go back to nurse practitioner school and share it with everybody, all my patients, and kind of to the world. I'm pretty passionate about it. Let's see. So part one tonight will be on just an overview of what autoimmune disease is and how it gets started. Part two are kind of a functional medicine approach, which I touched on. It's a little bit different than a conventional approach. I use both kind of the mainstream medicine and a functional medicine piece, and I'll explain what that is. And then the last part is the fun part. The last part is sort of, if you were my patient, how might I approach your treatment and diagnosis? Okay. All right, so in order to just kind of get started talking about autoimmunity, I really just want to give an overview of what is your immune system. It's really your body's defense against infection. So I really want to just give you a simplified explanation of this. So just think of your body as a castle with a moat around it. Your white blood cells are the soldiers, and inside the castle, they patrol that castle for things like germs and bacteria, viruses, etc. And then the skin are the walls of the castle, and it's the first line of defense to kind of keep those invaders out. Next, we have special forces, and those are sort of antibodies which are really specialized weapons that target specific invaders, and they mark those invaders so that the soldiers know what to fight, and they in order to neutralize or eliminate them and get rid of them. And then we have a training ground, which is sort of our spleen and lymph node. And that's where the soldiers really learn to fight the specific types of invaders and remember them so that they can fight them faster the next time and recognize them. And then around that castle, we have a moat. When there's an invader, the moat helps prevent that invader from getting deeper in the castle. It makes it easier for your soldiers to kind of win that battle. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about what really goes wrong in our community to start that process. The immune system distinguishes itself between your body's own cells, and non-self, which are kind of those foreign invaders to protect the body. That can malfunction, basically attacking its own cells. So think of it sort of as friendly fire, right? Autoimmunity is when our soldiers mistakenly attack the castle or the body itself, making its own structures, mistaking its own structures for enemy invaders. Just as a side note, there's some indication that part of the issue is that we get DNA damage, or we get damage to the thyroid cells, and it's really the initiation of their cells, but there's somehow damaged, and then there's this immune confusion that starts, and that is part of that pathology as well. Okay, so this is really how this diagram where you see just diseases and symptoms. Typically what drives you into see your doctor is you have a slew of symptoms, and the doctor is going to take those symptoms and try to come up with a diagnosis, do some lab work, do a physical, that type of thing. Sometimes you're given a name for your disease, and sometimes you don't, because we just don't, or they just don't know what it is. And then based on that, as I kind of talked about myself, they're just focused on managing kind of those disease symptoms. And I will explain how functional medicine uses those concepts, but kind of looks at a few other things too. There are approximately 100 plus autoimmune diseases. Every year I feel like that number kind of goes up more and more, for 50 and 40, 50, and then 80 and over 100. And I think it's really more than that. And I'll kind of touch on that in a little bit. And it's estimated that the prevalence is 1 in 10 in the population, a little bit higher in women, 13%, in men, and 7%. I don't know if I have a skewed view of it, but I feel like it's actually higher than that. Maybe that's just because I get a lot of those patients inside my practice, but I do think it's actually much higher than that. And I think a lot of us have mild forms of it. Okay, so the next section is that functional medicine perspective. And that's sort of my specialty, my love of my life. The functional medicine approach is a little bit different. As you can see, we still have this diseases and symptoms, but now we've kind of added root causes. Conventional medicine, again, they're really not interested. They're focused on managing symptoms. And it's not that they don't ever know what the root cause is, but functional medicine providers are really interested in what is happening in those roots and kind of underneath the hood. We still might, again, come up with a disease like Hashimoto's or MS or celiac or Crohn's. But we want to know, and we're really interested in understanding what that root cause is and kind of looking at it to dial down what's activating and pushing that disease into, and hopefully we want to push it into remission at least. So what is functional medicine? Simply put, it's rebalancing the body's imbalances. So things like what would be an example of an imbalance? If you had poor digestion, hormonal issues, inflammation, detoxification problems, nutrient deficiencies, immune dysregulations, looking at different systems and trying to rebalance those imbalances. I think it's really important. If we caught the first common misconception, but essentially what I was saying is autoimmunity is strictly genetic and not influenced by lifestyle. We'll talk a little bit about that more later. Autoimmune diseases are entirely distinct and unrelated. Not true. They have common pathways, at least in the functional medicine world, they do. And I think, and conventionally, I would say that's probably, some of that's true too, because a lot of the medications that they use, like with MARAs, are on the biologics. They try to manage the symptoms by dialing inflammation down. The immune system is only overactive in autoimmune diseases. It is true that it's primarily overactive, but you can also have hidden infections that can be promoting or triggering disease, autoimmune disease as well. And then suppression of the immune system is the best treatment approach, not always. Sometimes we want more balance or modulation of both sides of our immune system. Diet has little impact on autoimmune diseases. I hear this all the time from patients and physicians that their doctor doesn't believe that diet can have an impact. I think it's starting to become more accepted, but for sure, a lot of the times foods that we eat and environmental things have an impact on inflammation. Symptom management is equivalent to disease management. Absolutely not. Autoimmune diseases can't be reversed or put into remission. Maybe qualify that without medications. Absolutely not. And then testing for autoantibodies is only valid once symptoms are severe. We often see on routine labs something called an anti-nuclear antibody. Sometimes they're elevated and sometimes they're not elevated. And doesn't mean that we can't kind of know or understand, and at least from my perspective, that you probably have underlying autoimmune disease and there's things that we can do to act upon that. And then moderate to high levels of exercise is beneficial, always beneficial for autoimmune conditions. I would say low levels are very beneficial in almost everybody. Movement and moving that lymph and sending signals to your muscle. You have 800, I think that's the number that I've just recently heard. They're called myokines. They're just chemical messengers that your muscles make when you exercise. And if you're not telling your muscles, if your muscles are not telling your brain that you need energy, it's going to actually downregulate energy stores. So we don't want to give up that exercise. But it is also true that sometimes moderate and high levels are not really good for you, because it is sort of like you're running from a lion and you're in fight or flight, and too much exercise in the setting of autoimmune disease can be detrimental. But I would say you always do want a little bit of movement. And then one size fits all treatment protocols are effective for autoimmune diseases. And I'm sure you know how I already feel about that, having practicing functional medicine, that it's a very personalized approach. So the development of autoimmune disease is a complex process that involves your genetic predisposition and environmental factors, really, that I'm just going to move this over so I can see my screen a little bit. That kind of leads to that immune system attacking cells, the soldiers kind of creating friendly fire, and then, hitting the castle and causing havoc in your tissues. And then it's kind of creating this state of immune confusion. I talked a little bit about this, but mild forms of autoimmune disease response probably occur naturally in most people, but for people with a predisposition, and I would say a lot of us actually have those genetics, and those genetics are getting kind of triggered because of those environmental factors more and more. You know, we have more, we can really change our gene expression is what I was saying. So it's not true. We used to think that you had your genetics and that was it. If they were expressed, that we could never turn them down. But we know that environmental exposures can either turn up the volume or turn down the volume. Epigenetics are like a switch that can that are influenced by lifestyle and environmental factors and impact how our genes behave. So I want you to think of it as genetics are the hardware and epigenetics are the software. And we can write code or programming to kind of change those genetics without kind of changing the hardware underneath, and to either enhance or harm. Okay. I don't know. Let's go back there. All right. So more roots of autoimmunity, things like lifestyle. Let's see. I think you can see my picture, but so things like pore detoxification or toxin exposures that can kind of harm us through those epigenetic changes. So things like, what can we control? Plastic water bottles, cause, or endocrine disruptors or hormone disruptors, pesticides on produce, for instance. We want to wash our those pesticides off, or eat organic, eat grass-fed meat, for instance. We want to limit the exposures that we have. And if we're spraying pesticides outside, if we absolutely have to, better not to, but wear gear, and then think about like even the cookware that you're using so that we're avoiding those chemicals. Poor nutrition we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Uncontrolled stress is a big one. Again, if your body thinks that you're running from a lion in a constant state, that's gonna ultimately is going to increase stress hormone or cortisol, and it's going to kind of start breaking down tissues in the body, create insulin resistance, and also more inflammation. Sedentary lifestyle is also very problematic for the reasons that I kind of already talked about. We need to tell our muscles, it is literally like a medicine in a bottle or a medication. When we're exercising, we're releasing 800 things that we don't even know what a lot of those things do, but we have to assume that they're beneficial. And we also know that helps create energy if we're more sedentary, and it helps decrease inflammation. Inadequate sleep is also problematic. It's not a badge of honor to only get 4 to 6 hours of sleep and then try to finish your work. That's very, very detrimental. The first half of the night, we're working on our deep sleep. During deep sleep, if you're not getting enough deep sleep, if you're not really getting enough sleep, you're really setting yourself up for neurological damage in the brain, because that's when we detoxify. It's sort of like a sponge, or a janitor comes in and sweeps everything up during that first half of the night, and the second half of the night is when we're working out our stress. And so you can't really do either one of those things efficiently if you're not getting enough sleep. Unhealthy relationships is also a big one. So if you're in a bad relationship, for instance, I think I read an article, maybe it's even 5 or so you can imagine if you have a really poor relationship and everybody fights, and that's okay. But that can kind of perpetuate and kind of keep that inflammation occurring. And then social isolation is a really big one. We all got a taste of that during COVID. It kind of makes sense from an evolutionary point of view that would be problematic, and I'll explain that in just a second. But social isolation is worse than sedentary lifestyle, drinking greater than 6 drinks a day, and smoking 15 cigarettes per day. It is very, very significant. And I think that's why we see so much unrest in our society today. If you think about, like, from an evolutionary point of view, why would we be hardwired to want to live in groups? Well, if you lived in a tribe and you were kind of shunned to live in the outskirts or live by yourself, you're not going to be able to kind of share in the food or get help finding food, and you're going to be more susceptible to prey. So we're really hardwired to love and to be part of a community. Okay. Continuous or repeated immune activation and autoimmunity leads to persistent inflammation, which, you know, some inflammation is fine. Acute inflammation, which is just, hey, I broke my arm or I cut myself. You want some, because you need those soldiers to go to that area and help promote healing. It's when it becomes persistent and it kind of keeps moving forward over time that it becomes a problem. Gut health in particular is crucial in managing and preventing autoimmune responses by supporting the immune function and reducing inflammation. We actually have chronic inflammation going on in our gut all the time because the gut system, but it's it's one of those where autoimmune disease is initiated, and everything that we do is autoimmune related. I would actually say my belief is that you can't really treat autoimmunity without addressing gut health. Why is gut health so important? Because the gastrointestinal tract houses about 70 to 80% of your immune system. So it's really, really significant, and it's a key site of potential immune system activation. A healthy gut helps maintain immune tolerance. So what does that mean? Kind of making sure that there's no friendly fire that's starting to attack, right, the body. So what is leaky gut? I don't know if most of you probably have heard of what that is. I'm not sure if it's ever been explained to you, but it's also known as, kind of in the mainstream, as an intestinal permeability. And it occurs when the lining of the intestines become compromised, allowing undigested food particles, toxins, and bacteria to kind of leak into the bloodstream. That breach in the gut barrier triggers an immune response, that kind of those things that we talked about, and leading to kind of more and more inflammation or uncontrolled inflammation. And it's linked to not only autoimmune disease, but allergies, and I would call allergies actually an autoimmune disease, digestive problems, inflammatory, anything you can think of disease-wise. So I just want to kind of point out a couple of things. Let's see, my pointer, I don't think you guys can see it on the screen, but if you look on the left side and you see those gut cells, right? They're one cell thick. There's only one layer of cells, so that the gut lining is, number one, really, really sensitive. And we want those gut cells to be like bricks and mortar. And then we have these little things that look like little threads through them. Those are called tight junctions that help keep those cells close together. So you can kind of see this cartoon where it says, it's kind of showing above the cells, toxins, food particles, drugs, and pathogens. And what is supposed to happen is you're supposed to chew food, or it's supposed to be mechanically broken down or chemically broken down through like or stomach acid or digestive enzymes, and small particles are supposed to reach those finger-like projections. And then our immune cells kind of peek up between those cells and kind of touch the small particles, and kind of they decide whether or not it's harmful. If it's not harmful, they're given a tag, and then those little finger-like projections pick up the food and allow them in. They're given like basically a hall pass. If not, it's like kind of like a conveyor belt where all these big proteins, these toxins, these food particles, drugs, and pathogens just kind of flow out of the system, and they're not sensed. But you can see on this other side, right, where it's a little bit red and it's pink, a lot of times these little things get blunted off and they can't pick up particles anyway. It's kind of a free-for-all, and the immune system starts getting activated, and then that kind of forms autoimmunity. These things are going into systemic circulation, and not only that, but they land in places where they're not supposed to be. So let's pick on gluten, because we typically in functional medicine, we pick on gluten, and everybody's like, why is it always gluten? Well, these little tight junctions right here, one of the only foods, there's just a few things, alcohol, gluten, those are two examples. And then there's a toxin that bad bacteria kind of spit out. They're one of the only things that can kind of break these tight junctions apart. So that is like one of the main reasons that, and then it causes inflammation. That's why we pick on it so much. And when you're talking about autoimmunity, you don't really want to kind of aggravate that state. We want to kind of reduce that inflammation as much as we can, and kind of allow that, kind of take that load or that inflammatory load off. Hope that all makes sense. Okay, so this is kind of this tree again. You can see a lot more things on it this time. We see kind of in the center, those are those disease or those symptoms basically that kind of drive us into the doctor. We're given a name. Those are kind of all different types of names: Crohn's disease, rheumatoid, so on and so forth. But then we have the root causes down here. So we have predisposing factors, which are genetic. We have initiating factors, which we didn't really talk about, but sometimes, almost always, before someone has a onset of autoimmunity, there's some type of trigger. And that trigger can be anything from divorce to a death in the family to, gosh, a car accident would be another really good example. And then there's kind of this feed forward inflammatory response that is really hard to resolve and get shut off. And then we have all these things down at the bottom that we talked about that are lifestyle factors. Those lifestyle factors are really important because, again, we don't want to aggravate our situation. We want to promote tolerance, not create inflammation and exacerbating things. Okay, last part, and we're in the home stretch, and this is the fun piece for me because this is where I get my patients and get to help you. Okay, so this is kind of hard to see, so I apologize for that on the screen. But these are just forms that I have. Let's say if you were my patient, one thing all my new patients, I want them to do an initial intake to go over their forms. The better you fill out your forms for your functional medicine or really even your naturopathic provider, the better are able to kind of figure out what's triggering you. And so we do kind of common things like medical questionnaires, new patient intake for social history. So we're going to ask about kind of all those lifestyle things to see if there's anything that we can help you with. And then we take a really good family history so we understand your genetics. But then we have something called the ACE score. So what is that? The ACE score is adverse childhood experiences, a questionnaire. And it's known that the higher the number, the more trauma you've experienced. And I would personally tell you that if you don't kind of deal with your childhood trauma, and I would say even in adulthood, if you're not dealing with those traumas, it's creating a state of inflammation in the body or stress in the body. And you probably are going to be hard pressed to really heal completely until you're kind of have that taken care of. So it's truly important. It's truly a significant piece of healing. Next thing are the different types of tests. These are just samples. I do more than these, but over to the left here, those are just routine labs. I'm looking at things like cholesterol, but taking a deeper dive. I'm looking at, 84 to 85 different types of labs. I'm going to do some of the common things. I'm going to look at your white blood cells. I'm going to look at liver and kidney, but I'm also going to look at things like anti-nuclear antibody, things that you would use kind of in mainstream medicine. And then down here is an example. It's called the Dutch test. And that's looking at cortisol levels and like throughout the day, and pairing that with also hormones and hormone pathways, because sometimes you're making things like bad estrogens or bad testosterone. They're going down bad pathways. We want to know that because we don't want, we want you to detoxify. You should be able to take hormones, use them and lose them and get them out of the body. And then over to the right is a metabolic test, and it's looking for energy cycles and blocks and energy cycles. And are you getting enough nutrients? Are you getting enough minerals? Are you getting enough proteins and things like that? And then oxidative stress markers, which are damaging to cells. So we want to know about all those things. Sometimes I use that, sometimes I don't. And then lower right-hand corner is a heavy metals test example. The middle is an example of a stool test. It's not all of the stool tests, but it's got some pretty important pieces. We're really interested in what is happening in the gut in terms of your bacteria. At the top, we want to know, like, these are representing potential bacteria that cause or that are associated with different types of autoimmunity. There's a lot of very specific bacteria for specific diseases. So sometimes if we can't quite figure it out, this is a way to kind of parse out exactly what it might be, what that disease name might be. We want to know things like, do you have yeast in your gut? Do you have parasites, for obvious reasons? And are they contributing to that inflammatory state? And then down here, we want to know if you have malabsorption issues. Are you able to break down fat? Are there enzymes that are helping you break down like your different types of foods and things like that, things like carbs and proteins. And then there's inflammation markers. And, these are things that traditionally the mainstream medicine is not looking at comprehensively. Okay. So I want to touch on the microbiome. I talked a little bit about it, but the microbiome, sorry, is a collection of microbes that are living in the gut. And they can be viruses, bacteria, parasites, and they play a vital role in digestion, or immune function, and overall health. They're supposed to be helping to balance out our immune system and make things like vitamins and help us with detoxification for hormones and short chain fatty acids. Really important for balance and things like that. It's a way for our bodies our immune system to communicate to the rest of our bodies as well. And so I want you to think of the microbiome as sort of like a rainforest. A lot of times that rainforest is knocked out by overuse of antibiotics. And then we have to revitalize that rainforest. Sometimes when we knock out the friendly bacteria, what I call the commensal bacteria, that allows bad bacteria that I would call them opportunistic, where they're potentially pathogenic. They're not really, they might be causing low-level inflammation, but it allows them to take a foothold and take over things and kind of exacerbate that inflammation as well. So basically we want to know that. And typically if I want to help you with your gut health, I might recommend what is called a 5R program. So basically that entails removing the bad stuff, replacing the good stuff, repopulating what's missing, and then we're going to be working on repairing the gut lining while we're doing all of that. And then we always want to integrally rebalance kind of those lifestyle things, especially stress, because as I told you, it's really hard to get better if you're not kind of managing that stress. Okay, so removal might entail something like an elimination diet. Like I said, we always pick on gluten, so that's almost always longer term, and dairy is a close second. But we might have to do, kind of depending on the amount of inflammation you have, more than just gluten and dairy. And we might kind of, if we did a stool test, we might include a course of like herbal antibiotics. Sometimes I use prescription antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, that type of thing, anti-parasites, parasitic treatments. And then if we have malabsorption or maldigestion, we're going to add an enzyme to help restore that digestion, to help break things down. And then we want to repopulate that. So sometimes we use probiotics, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes it can be a trigger. So sometimes we use prebiotics, which are kind of fibers or phytonutrients that help feed the bacteria. Sometimes we don't, because that can also be a trigger. So we just have to kind of use our best judgment. And then we want to repair the gut. We might use something like broth or collagen or aloe or slippery elm or marshmallow root, DGL, to kind of soothe the gut and provides, some amino acids in the case of collagen powder and bone broth. Or we might use combinations of vitamins and herbs, such as vitamin A. Vitamin D is really helpful in modulating the immune system, so balancing it out. We never want those levels to be low. B vitamins are really important for stress control. They help with neurotransmitters, but they also help with detoxification. Zinc also helps with repair. Omega-3 fatty acids, or like your fish oils, when they're out of balance, it creates inflammation. So we're looking at that on routine labs, and things like glutamine also. Okay, we talked about rebalancing. So I just wanted to show you this slide, to kind of give you a better idea of what does an elimination diet entail. Well, first of all, why would we want to do that? Well, because if we have food triggers, we kind of, we kind of show that, right? If we have a free-for-all going in through, think of it as cheesecloth with holes in it, and we have all these particles going in, you're going to become sensitive to all the things that you're eating. So people a lot of times will want to come in and they'll want to do food sensitivity testing, and I'm not opposed to it, but I don't do it right away. I prefer to do an elimination diet and have you track your symptoms, because a lot of times you don't even know that you're having them or that they're related. So they can range from true allergies, which would be like anaphylaxis, to intolerances that might be causing rapid heart rate, sweating, diarrhea, constipation, or all of the above, and rashes. It's going to really help reduce that inflammation load and support healthy microbiome by kind of increasing, phytonutrients and helping get things out of the body, helping with detoxification. We want to get rid of that toxic load because that can also be damaging to cells and change those cells. So that middle part are the things that if we were doing an extended elimination diet, that's what we would avoid. And here are the things that we would really want to eat. Things like game meats and whole grains, but gluten-free whole grains, healthy oils, avocado, ghee, and yes, ghee is a little bit different than regular butter because the casein part of it is taken out, so it's not as inflammatory. Avocado or coconut oil if your lipids are not high. Preferably no soy or peanut oil, and sticking to poultry seeds, things like that. Nuts I would probably stay away from because they can also cause food sensitivity, and you really want to eat up to 30 different types of food plants per week. But that can be seeds and nuts. I also want to reiterate and pound it into you that every time you eat a bite of food, it's programming your body to either turn inflammation or on or off. And so bear that in mind. What you put on the end of your fork makes a decision about whether you're going to upregulate inflammation or you're going to downregulate inflammation by changing that software program. We talked about lifestyle modifications, also integral into kind of getting those symptoms under control. We talked about detoxification and the things that we can control in terms of like cookware and, I'm going to pound on the plastic water bottles because we all do it at some time or another, but all the things that I talked a little bit about proper nutrition, but basically what does that mean? We want to sort of like a Mediterranean type of diet that has a lot of vegetables. Most of the time in autoimmunity, you want to do low carb just because it helps manage antibodies and symptoms. So lots of vegetables, lots of plant food, and then managing stress, which we talked about already. We talked about movement. We talked about sleep and improving the importance of improving those relationships in terms of trying to get your symptoms under control. And really, it applies to anybody, right? If you want good quality of life and you want longevity, you have to be thinking about these lifestyle modifications. So in conclusion, we're to the end. Autoimmunity is when the body fails to recognize its own cells as self. It begins targeting its own tissues. So those soldiers misfire, right? And they attack the body. Gut health and chronic inflammation are important triggers and perpetuators of autoimmunity. Once autoimmunity is initiated, the volume of one's genetics can be epigenetically dialed down. The 5R gut program can help improve gut health and improve autoimmunity by dialing down your immune system and systemic inflammation to balance levels. And then balancing exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress, and toxic load in your lifestyle is crucial for addressing those potential imbalances in the body's core systems and kind of solving this autoimmune puzzle, right? And maintaining and restoring our health overall. And I just want to leave you to remember that you are totally amazing and that you have the capability to take control of your health and live a good, optimal quality of life. And then this is my information, and I just want to again thank everybody for coming and kind of dealing with the technology. Sorry about that. The internet was very unstable tonight not surprising, I think. Just kind of in the area, but I'm going to open up to questions now. If anybody has questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, I have a question. So, how can I use you as a doctor of sense? I mean, I'm seeing somebody right now. I was diagnosed in 1993 with multiple sclerosis. Most recently, though, I went through a stage of radiation therapy for stage 2 prostate cancer. But I was also diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And so I live in Tacoma, and so I'm seeing people here at the multi-care site, but my neurologist is in Seattle. So I'm wondering, how can I use you? Do you accept Medicare insurance and stuff like that?
I don't. I actually am a cash practice. I do submit like sometimes I'll send you to, like, if I have to refer you, obviously we use insurance. Occasionally we use your insurance for labs, but by and far, a lot of times the functional medicine labs are not covered. This little, can you see the slide presentation or
Yes.
not? So that little thing, if you scan it,
Okay.
that will bring up my website.
Cool.
And my pricing is down towards the bottom. You just have to click on those boxes.
Okay. So where are you located?
I'm actually located on the multi-care campus in Elmore.
I'm sorry, where?
At Elmore.
Elmore, okay.
Mhm.
So we live, my wife and I live in East Tacoma. And so,
Okay.
yeah. Looking for the app to do the picture deal. Well, thank you for the information. Really appreciate it. And so I know I need to get better on my diet. When you list the things to eat, like the top 5, I'm addicted to caffeine. I can't help it. So I'm trying to switch to
Caffeine are
mushroom.
not necessarily bad things. You just have to do it in moderation.
Exactly.
But sometimes that's about energy. You know, if you don't have energy, you have to try to find ways to get energy. And when you have a condition like multiple sclerosis, right, you're gonna feel depleted very,
Right.
very often. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you always able to determine which autoimmune disease it is, whether it be lupus or any of the others?
Not always. Not until it gets significant enough. But in my mind, it doesn't really matter what your autoimmune disease, it's all pretty much treated the same way. And so there's a few nuances, obviously. And there are probably ways that we can go, like there are tests that we can help kind of, because there's different types of immune cells and different chemical signatures and we can test for that. But I don't really like to do that because if we're, insurance isn't great about reimbursing that. If we're interested in resources, we have to be mindful of that. But some people just want to know, they just want, and it's such a relief because they've been told, I always talk about Venus Williams. She, is this great tennis player. And I probably, it's been maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I saw her speak at a conference. And probably nobody would ever know, but she actually had Sjogren syndrome and she didn't know it. And she said, compared to Serena, she just always felt like she was walking in mud all the time and she was tired and her dad, of course would yell at her and just, get started. And she said, I just felt like I couldn't activate. And of course she was performing like crazy. And she was sent to a psychiatrist who, she had depression. So she was put on antidepressants and it wasn't helping. And so she finally gets a diagnosis of Sjogren and sees a nutritionist, gets her system under control. And then she, just knocked it out of the park. I mean, like literally, right? And so I love that story because it's so significant. And she talked about that a lot. It's when she wrote her book several years ago. Yeah, it's an amazing story. Very cool story.
So
Yeah.
thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Don't be shy, folks. If you're shy, enter it in the chat box.
There's a few I think these are for me. Any questions? No more questions. Well, you guys can always, if you have questions, you can always email me. My email is right there. If it's easier, you can scan it and you can submit a question through the website. But thanks for coming and attending. I love to share my knowledge with you and hope to see you if you guys are looking for help. So.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Michelle.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for tuning in and being here. Definitely reach out to her, and she's gonna be back with us in June and September. So mark your calendars.
Excellent. I have one question. Can we get a copy of the slide deck?
Sure. I
Okay,
will. I'll get that to you. And
great, thanks.
yeah, we can send it. Yep, of course. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for coming. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too.